Welcome to the VMware Multi-Cloud Podcast. My name is Eric Nielsen, and with me today is my co-host David Jasso. On today's show, we're going to be covering Oracle Cloud, talking with Jeff Eberhard, Director of Cloud Engineering at Oracle Inc. David, how's it going today?
It's going well, Eric.
Fantastic. So why don't you take us through the introduction to our guest, Jeff?
Sure. Hey, Jeff, welcome. Want to let you introduce yourself to everyone, but also give us your history. Last time you were on the podcast was, a year plus ago, and you were with VMware. And now you're over at Oracle. We'd love to hear sort of, your background and also what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So thank you both, Eric and David, for having me on the podcast. So I joined Oracle almost exactly a year ago after being at VMware for nearly a decade. At VMware, I was a solution engineer, and then I led different solution engineering teams, including a stint of time on the VMware Cloud on AWS team. And so I think that got some interest from the Oracle group as they were starting up their VMware offering, Oracle Cloud VMware Solution. And so they reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to come over here and run sales and solution architecture and basically get that stood up, from step one here in the Americas? And I said, yes. So for the past year, I've been working with that team, working with our product and engineering teams, and just trying to make VMware a integral part to the overall Oracle Cloud story.
Hey, Jeff. Why don't we start with just talking a little bit about what is Oracle and what are they doing on cloud? And a lot of people aren't that familiar with Oracle as a cloud company, so maybe you could give us a little background on that.
Yeah, so Oracle Cloud is, it's called a second generation cloud by our CEO and CTO, Larry Ellison. And basically the thought process of it is, Oracle has been in the enterprise software industry for 30 plus years. And frankly, with the acquisition of Sun, the enterprise hardware industry. And so much of customers' infrastructure and data runs on top of Oracle because data is the most important thing. I think we'd all agree right now. It's the thing that all the companies are looking to bring together. And with Oracle having decades of experience in data, they said, hey, you know what? Our customers are starting to ask about cloud and how do we make this a better experience for them? Because, frankly, Amazon and Microsoft have done a great job of starting off with cloud, and you have access to instances that you can spin up and spin down, and it keeps costs down initially. But when you start looking at the cloud overall, there were some things that customers have noticed, like, resiliency and availability aren't necessarily built in, right? You have a infrastructure part go down, and the ask is, well, build the application to be able to handle that. Well, with a lot of more legacy software, that's not been very easy. And so VMware's had a very great opportunity in there to step into some of these other clouds and bring the high availability and resiliency that VMware has and put them on top of a cloud. But Oracle said, well, not that VMware isn't great, and obviously I'll talk more about that later, but we need some of that resiliency and automation built into the core features and functionalities of the cloud as well. And that even goes all the way to things like, patches and upgrades of your database software, for example. That's not something that a company does to increase their own ability to sell more or help their customers more. That's just back-end stuff that no one cares about. So with Oracle Cloud, they said, well, why don't we automate as much of that as possible? Let's use artificial intelligence and machine learning to make it as easy as possible to make the data that you're trying to provide to the end users and the customers resilient, available. And then, there are some other things that customers came to us and said, we really do want to be able to scale on demand. And we really, honestly, maybe we want a cloud-like infrastructure, but we want it on premises. Well, some of our competitors have done things like that. You've heard of Amazon Outpost, for example, or Azure Stack. But Outpost and Azure Stack are, their own thing, right? Like there's AWS and then there's Outposts. Mm-hmm. With Oracle Cloud, we have something called Dedicated Region Cloud at Customer, where we'll actually stand up the same Oracle Cloud that is in, the data centers worldwide that we have, but we'll stand it up in your data center. So you get access to the same features and functionalities that you have in the cloud, but it's in your data center. So if you are concerned about security or performance, or there's any reason that you need it on-prem, you can do that. We've also had a lot of customers start moving to software as a service and platform as a service type of offerings. And Oracle has expanded its software to be pushing more that direction. Well, if you're moving your ERP software or your CRM software to the cloud, wouldn't it be nice to have all the other applications that need access to that to be as close as possible? So when you're running your ERP software in Oracle Cloud, you can run all the rest of your software in that exact same cloud. So everything is right next to each other. So you have that data gravity, that data locality that allows you to have the performance that you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So when you said the second generation part of this is really around this whole issue of resiliency and availability, and sort of building that in, sort of rethinking the notion that that always has to be in the application. Is that sort of like, it could be, but if you don't have that, and if that's not what you're, especially if you're looking at something that's more traditional application, you don't have to re-architect entirely the application to sort of have those capabilities, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely the thought process behind it, right? We want to take as much as we can at the platform layer, remediate things, keep things up and running, provision, scale, tune, all of that, so that you don't have to worry about that. You're just more focused on what the application is providing, not the infrastructure below it.
And really is a different twist on the whole issue of like as a service in local cloud, right? Because as you said, if you get Outpost or something like that, you're still going to run it. It's a software stack, but you're responsible for it. This is sort of like, really at next level, right? Where it's like, no, we'll do it. It's on your premises, but it's truly a completely managed service stack.
Absolutely.
And so that's interesting. I think it's honestly, that's kind of what we're trying to do as well with some of the offerings but as a service where it's still running in your data center, but it's fully managed by someone else, basically. I think right. That's a good route. One of the things that's sort of interesting about Oracle is that, unlike some of the other vendors, they're showing up with a complete enterprise software stack as well. So I assume that's been sort of also pretty interesting to customers, right? Which is this notion of, there's sort of multiple angles on cloud for Oracle, right? Because they're also a huge now SaaS company, SaaS right. offering company, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So like I said, most of our customers, at least the really large ones, started using Oracle on premises years ago, right? Decades ago. But again, running your own box, running your own software doesn't provide the value that you're looking for. And so a lot of those same customers over the years said, hey, we like your software, we like the applications, we like what it's doing, but we don't want to run it on our own. We want you to run it for us. And so Oracle spent, years building SaaS offerings of all of the on-premises stuff that they offered. And of course, those are still available for customers that prefer to run them that way. But when we look at the software as a service offerings or the platform as a service offerings, it again goes to allowing our customers to be able to spend the time and the effort on bringing their own value to market rather than bringing the value of our software to market. And so for those customers that have been looking to do that, we make it as simple as possible for them to do that. So maybe it's databases they were running on premises, and now we can turn them on with something like Exadata Cloud Service or Autonomous Database. And we have software like Golden Gate that'll actually move all of their databases up into the cloud for them. And what that allows them to do is actually be a lot more efficient with what they're doing. Because if you think about database, for example, maybe it's a transactional database, and you've got those customers that have really big days and then slow hours between midnight and 7 a.m. every day. If you buy for on-premises, you have to buy for your peak times, no matter what. When you move into the cloud and you have an autonomous database or an Exadata Cloud Service, you buy what you need for the moment that you're using it. You scale up, you use the additional performance, you don't need it anymore, you scale back down. When we look at things like data, data is consistently growing, but data also needs, not everyone's moving all the way to cloud. They're doing a hybrid cloud. They're still saying half on-prem, half in the cloud. Well, when they're trying to bring all of that data up into the cloud, what we've seen is customers still want access to that. And, crazy as it is, you move everything to cloud, it doesn't mean it's going to stay there. Mm-hmm. So what we've done from a network perspective is actually make it as simple as possible for customers to bring their data back and forth. Our offering of Fast Connect, which is equivalent to ExpressRoute or Direct Connect, with the other providers. If you have a Fast Connect, you actually get unlimited egress and ingress as part of that offering. So you're not paying to bring your own data back and forth between Oracle Cloud. You just use your data where you want to use it. And then when you want to bring it back, you bring it back and it's not costing you anymore. So it's giving customers the flexibility to be able to use cloud and use software as a service when they need to, but also be able to bring it back on-prem if that's what makes most sense to them.
Yeah, I could see that, especially around data. There's a lot of sensitivity to that, and even if you have that data in the cloud, you may not want to keep all of it there, and you want to sort of like keep the most, sort of recent whatever, and sort of bring a lot of data back on premise and mine it and do other things to it that you sort of need the flexibility. So that sounds great.
Sorry, guys.
Hey.
I completely lost audio.
Oh, that's okay.
Apologize.
No worries.
Anything.
David,
There, now I got you again.
Yeah.
All right, great. I have a quick question, Jeff. Just to you talked about optimization of server capacity, right? Peaks and lows, and right. So you get to blend that across multiple customers or cloud services. So I think that's good. How much of this is also kind of the capital expense versus capitalization of software costs versus expense software, where now I get to, subscription-based services where not only am I not buying per peak load, right, and having servers that I have to amortize over X number of years, now I can actually just take all this as an expense and kind of operate. My expenses match more accurately what I consumed or used for my business during that moment. So I wonder how much of that is also at play.
I think that's coming up with a lot of customers because, when it comes down to it, costs matter, right? There's always someone who's going to be out there and have something that's less expensive or easy, easier to deploy. But when it comes down to it for our customers themselves, they need, you think of something like, COVID last year. A lot of companies were set up to work in the office, and the software that they had was meant for local people and all of that. And suddenly everyone's gone, and that's, brings up their potential cost exponentially if they need to buy on-demand software. And now, fingers crossed, at some point this Delta variant goes away. People are going to be coming back in the office, but a lot of those customers may have made one-time purchases to be able to handle everyone being gone. And now as it spins back down, that's going to cost them. So customers are looking at that and going, well, how do we scale up, scale down, make it a ongoing expense versus a large capital expenditure? The other thing is, though, customers, Oracle customers, for example, it's no secret that our software costs a lot of money. And a lot of them have purchased perpetual licensing, or they have purchased licenses that they want on premises. And so to help customers, move to the cloud, if that's what makes more sense for them, we've actually about a month ago announced something called support rewards. And basically what it's saying is you bought these licenses and you're going to have to pay, you don't have to pay, but you're probably going to pay support on these licenses for the foreseeable future, but you also are starting to make the move to cloud. And so with support rewards, what we're doing is we're actually taking a portion of what they're paying in support and giving them cloud credits to be able to make that move to cloud. So again, capital expenditure versus operational expenditure, we're helping them make that transition right now, because we realize customers don't want to throw away that sunk cost of the software they bought, but they may not be ready to move all the way.
That's really interesting. And David, I'll get
Sure.
back to you. I'll let you go in a second. But it is interesting to consider the support costs that many packaged software companies have begun to rely on. I know we use at VMware, Chorus and Jive and these other ones. And 50% of my cost is actually the support payments that you're doing for that package. And as you move to cloud, that support ratio changes, I assume, quite a bit, because you're no longer supporting an on-prem instance in places where you've moved that workload to the cloud. And so Oracle can then change that dynamic of what you're actually paying for, because I don't think Oracle wants to charge a large amount for support, but they have to, because that's what it takes to keep something running on-prem, where you have to go to customers and help them resolve issues and so forth. So it actually just is more optimized by doing cloud, because you can get rid of that support layer.
Well, yeah, you think of something autonomous, right? The whole thing you'll hear on Oracle Cloud is autonomous. If you take out the people from the steps, and the people are the things that tend to cause the need for support, right? And you make everything just work on its own and not need that, well, now our costs go down to be able to support that, which allows us to pass through, whether in the software as a service offering or the platform as a service offering, those savings, because we're managing it and it's all being automated anyways.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, Jeff, maybe we can switch gears a little bit, because
Sure.
you went over there to focus on VMware on Oracle, right? So maybe you can tell us sort of a couple things. One is what you're seeing with sort of, what's driving people to do that, but also what are the most common use cases you're seeing? Like, what are the scenarios that say, yeah, let's do that? Because, obviously that's, slightly different than just the general value proposition of Oracle. There's some very things specific to VMware and VMware customers. Maybe we can chat about that.
Sure. Well, Oracle and VMware have I would call it a Venn circle of customers, right? It's not even a Venn diagram. It's like they have the exact same customers, and customers have, grown to rely on VMware over the past couple of decades because it's solid software, large offering of features that are helpful from a security perspective, availability, et cetera, like, all of your listeners probably are aware of. But the frank thing is, customers at the same time, especially at the higher levels, are being asked to go to cloud. And when it comes to going to cloud, there's that lift and shift discussion that customers have to have internally. And they say, okay, well, we're running, some on stuff on bare metal today. We're running some on VMware. We got to get it into the cloud. What's the easiest, fastest, least likely to break things way to make that happen? And frankly, the least likely to break away things to make that happen is to bring it up on VMware again, right? Because when you re-platform an application, like I said earlier, your application may not be HA aware, and you bring it onto a native cloud instance, and suddenly you don't have the ability to keep it up and running if something goes wrong. So by bringing it up in VMware, you get to keep all of those features and functionalities. Now, Oracle Cloud VMware Solution is a little bit different than the other hyperscaler cloud solutions that are out there in kind of three key ways. Number one, OCVS isn't, strangely enough, based on Oracle having a lot of managed services, OCVS isn't a managed service. We're actually providing you basically pure VMware in the cloud. So what I mean by that is it's ESXi, vSAN, NSXT, vCenter, HCX, all of the features and functionalities that you see in the other clouds. But because we don't offer it as a managed service, you can actually use it the exact same way that you use it on premises. So you have third-party tools. We've seen customers come to us for example, they use Zerto. Zerto, you have to have access to the VIBs and be able to install. We can do that because you're managing your own environment. You want to do special things with NSXT and security products or other networking products. You can do that because, again, we're just running standard NSXT. So what that allows the customers to do is they can bring their databases, they can bring their other applications up and put those in native OCI, but then they can bring everything else that touches those applications up in native VMware. So it gives you the control level that the customers are asking for, because customers have been using VMware for decades. They don't necessarily want to relearn how to use it. They just want to use it the same way they have. Well, we let them do that. On top of that, because it's controlled by them and third-party solutions and everything work, it can tend to be a little bit more predictable. So some of the customers that we've talked to are running in another hyperscaler VMware cloud, and they're saying, hey, we love this, but the upgrades and the changes and the things that are happening out of our control are making it a little bit harder sometimes for us to do our business. We want to be able to run on vSphere 7 Update 2 and NSXT 3.1 and just know that our stuff is going to work and not have to worry about it. By giving them the control of that, they have the predictability that the environment tomorrow is going to be the same as it was today when you last logged in. Unfortunately, in other providers, that's not quite the same, right? Because those changes and those updates and those patches happen.
Just to point out, there is always a different value proposition between managed service that's managed by someone else and one you do yourself. So it's more of a choice point rather than sort of like a downside to one or the other, basically.
No, absolutely. And we've had customers frankly come to us and say, I wish you would do that managed service, right? So there's definitely the flip sides to that. And then Oracle, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, a big thing for Oracle is security, right? So Oracle Cloud Infrastructure overall is a zero trust security infrastructure. And what that means from a VMware perspective is you deploy OCVS, and my team is in charge of solution architecture for that. The second it's deployed, we don't have access to it anymore. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But we have had some financial services customers come to us and say, we like that you can't see anything. You can never touch anything. You can't do anything to our environment. the downside of that, of course, is from a support perspective, Eric, like you said earlier, right? If we're locked out of it completely, support comes back into play, and we have to work with them. So it's a little bit of a different offering than the other ones have. But like you said, David, some customers are really buying into that, and they're saying, hey, we want this. We want to have full control. We want to have that availability. We don't want it managed. And other customers have come to us and said the opposite, and that's okay. Yeah. It's about customer choice.
It's good to know the differences, so that it's like, if you're really looking for, that level of control, then this is an option. If what you're looking for is a managed, fully managed offering, then that's something else. I think that's good. Yeah. I mean, people should have choices out there, and this is just a different set of choices. It's nice that that those options all exist for folks, right?
Well, it's great of VMware to give that option, right? Yeah. Because in the multi-cloud world, customers want to be able to move from place to place and use what they want to use. And VMware, by partnering with so many hyperscalers, has given those customers the opportunity to work with the partners that they want to. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Eric, I think I'm kind of like, just sort of like, I think we're getting to it, and it's sort of like the nut of it in terms of like, what are the differences, which was sort of why I want to bring you on, Jeff, and talk about Oracle and what's different about the offering. I think this is great stuff. Is the adoption been good? Is like, are you starting to see people really wanting to do this?
Yeah, you can see my eyes light up. So adoption has been wonderful. I started basically day one that the solution was out there. And of course, like any enterprise sales process, it takes a little while as you get those customers ready and start moving them forward. But, we've got, I probably can't share numbers, but we have a number of production customers here in the US as well as worldwide. And honestly, on a week over week basis, I'm just seeing more and more success. Like it's kind of exciting how quickly that exponential kind of push has started hitting us. And the thing that we're looking forward to, VMworld obviously is coming up very soon, and so we're going to be doing a good amount of announcements and win wires and customer references during that. And I'm really excited to be able to show that soon.
Hey, yeah, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think this is pretty interesting, and obviously you're hitting a sweet spot in that I've seen a lot of customers and discussions we've had with key influencers, because my role is to work with key influencers, is that control where they do want to have access to the platform. Some of the other hyperscalers, that's not the case, right? You're kind of living in the world, and I can see that definitely offering up something where I can just pick up my workload and put it in the cloud. How much of this also, I think it plays well to the, I'm getting told by my CTO that I need to move to cloud. And this is a very straightforward, easy way to move to cloud. And the vision of VMware has been to allow you as a customer to be choosing which cloud you want, right? And that there are competitive cloud services that you can choose. And you guys have not only put your services above this, but you're also just giving a bare bones here's vSphere in a data center. We operate it. You've moved to cloud. You're going to get a service bill. Thank you very much. And so for some customers, this checks the box of, yes, Mr. CTO, I have now cloud services. We're using Oracle Cloud. This is working for us. And you haven't really changed your job role or how you're running things.
Yeah, we had an insurance customer spin up recently in 3 different regions worldwide. And they went from the first call that we had with them to being up and running in their first region in 9 days, which I'm talking the full gamut, right? We had to get networking and everything set up. They had the next 2 regions set up the next week, and now they're running in production across those 3 regions. So, GDPR was obviously a big portion of that. So they had some in England, some in Europe, some in the US. But imagine at any point going to, the key influencers that you're talking to and saying, okay, from the first conversation with Oracle to actually being up and running under 9 days. And, honestly, the deployment portion of that was a couple of hours, right? It was all the prep stuff that we had to do with them. But then to expand that to 3 more regions in another week, it's the easy button.
And I've heard this story countless times now and it's funny because people were bragging about what we did this project in 3 months, right? And everybody was really excited. Wow, we've migrated into some cloud, certain workloads just on top of VMC and AWS or VMC and different places or on a cloud. And people were bragging of 4 months, 3 months. Now it's like 30 days was the last one I heard, right? Like everybody's like, we started and we're done with moving workload into cloud in 30 days. And now we're like at 9 days, right? Where it just reminds me of the early days of VMware, where we would go into a rack and there'd be 20 machines and we had a software that would go through every node. And within 2 hours, we'd shut down 18 of the 20 servers and all your VMs were running on the bottom 2 servers, right? And it was like, I feel like cloud migration and setting up this cloud is coming to that state where we've gotten vSphere and the whole stack running on cloud, and you can just come in and literally hit some buttons, and 10 days later workload is running as it did before. You have to worry about the networks and the gateways, but other than that, it is becoming, and now it allows the cloud vendors to compete on service and on capacity and on energy costs and all the other things that that you can manage as a scalar kind of cloud provider.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And honestly, the VMware software is what makes that easy, right? HCX is key to that. If you want to move workloads as quickly as possible, you get that service mesh set up, and your on-prem and your cloud now look like the same data center. You start moving those workloads, and they move fast, right? So it's great.
Hey Jeff, you mentioned VMworld and new news, and not to have you tell us what the news is going to be, but what are the areas you think will be focuses in terms of like new developments and that sort of thing, without getting into the details, but just sort of what do you think's on the horizon?
So a couple of the really good things. One is second-party application support. So, there's first-party, right? There's Oracle stuff. Then there's third-party, which are things like Zerto and Veeam and Palo Alto Networks and others. But the second party is getting, the VMware software certified on top of VMware. And it's funny because it's been a little bit difficult, because VMware's different business units say, well, it's a hyperscaler, so we got to treat it a little bit differently, which I understand, because in a lot of the other hyperscalers, that is the case. But with us, because we're running the just pure VMware stack, we've been fighting that a little bit. So we're going to have some good announcements around other VMware software that will be very well appreciated by our customers, being officially supported by VMware on top of CVS.
Yeah, that makes sense.
On top of that, we're taking, from a features and functionality perspective, we are getting a lot of feedback right now that our offering is big. I mean, it is, right? These boxes have 52 cores and 50 terabytes of NVMe. That doesn't appeal much on the smaller end of the market, or in those regions where you don't need quite as much. And so, we should be seeing some announcements around that, on making it a little bit easier for customers to get into the offering.
Okay, cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
All right. I think this is great. This has been a great update on what's happening with Oracle. I actually know I learned a lot about sort of what are the differences. This is always a big question, right? Like, it's like, well, why Oracle over AWS versus Azure? And a lot of it comes down to preference, right? Organizations sort of have an affinity towards one group or another. And so we support that, but it's nice to also hear about some of the sort of, real technical differences between the offerings, and why you would pick one over another. That is, not, it's just because they're different. They're all slightly different in a way that appeals to some and not to others. So I think that's great to hear what's going on with Oracle. Eric, I didn't have any more. Anything else you wanted to get on the table here?
No, Jeff, it sounds like you're enjoying yourself over there. So I'm happy for that. I know it's always interesting. Last question I have is like, because it's always fun to pick people's brains when they move from company to company. You've gone now to where Oracle actually has software up at the top stack too, right? So any interest in, Kubernetes and that kind of stuff for applications, any exposure into that space, or is that kind of like in a different part of the business? Because it's always interesting to hear what a true software, because the end user app company is doing up at that top layer.
Yeah, so we have our Oracle Kubernetes engine, right? So OKE, it's a cloud native one. Obviously, Tanzu is something very big for VMware, and hopefully we'll be hearing some stuff about that regarding those playing well together. But there's a lot of it is a different business unit, but I'm seeing a lot of interest, not only in the Kubernetes side of things, but a lot in, like high performance computing is one of the just businesses that seems to be blowing up, because it's hard. You can't go buy 10,000 GPUs and put them on prem. You can't even get them anywhere right now because of all the, the Ethereum miners, right? So for customers that are looking to do those more, what would traditionally not necessarily be cloud native services, but now doing them in the cloud, and then you can combine things like a Kubernetes setup where everything's distributed with high performance computing, and actually be able to, one of our customers, Altair, right, is a big public reference of ours. They're doing that, right? They're doing their builds, they're doing their tests, and they're doing high performance computing all in one, all in the cloud. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I would think that AI and your data, because AI is, managing and coalescing information from data, would sit well together. So I can imagine that with your databases and the big data sitting there, then getting access to GPUs to be able to do AI on your big data sets would be a good connection between the two of those. So I can see that.
It's a new thing they've started calling the lake house, right? So there's data lakes and there's data warehouses. And how do you take a data lake and a data warehouse, put them together, use AI, and actually pull, actionable information out of them? It's a pretty neat thing.
Yeah, that's super cool. And yeah, it is hard to get GPUs these days. So the fact that big enough cloud, it's interesting, big enough vendors, like the chip shortage and everything that's going on, like only the top tier vendors are actually getting access to this gear now, right? So it does allow the hyperscalers to kind of get an edge in being able to get access to that gear, right? So that's another thing at play as well. So Jeff, cool conversation. Thanks for coming on and talking.
Good seeing you, Jeff. Good catching up.
Good seeing you as well. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Al. Good talking to you.